Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Kyle Watts. So today I picked up a new lens, and that's the Tamron 28 to 200 millimeter. And I wanted to see how well this lens is at kind of just being the one lens to rule them all. One that you put in your backpack, the one that you take on a trip. So today we're going to go take some video and some photo of the mountains. The only problem is we're in Minnesota and there's no mountains anywhere. Today we made it to the beautiful state of Colorado. I'm currently in the Colorado Rockies in Loveland Pass. So today we're going to check out the Tamron 28 to 200 to kind of see if it's kind of a one lens that rules them all. So on this trip, this is the only lens that I brought with my A7S III. So the goal with this video today is to see if you can just bring this one lens on a trip and not have to bring everything else with you. I think it's a pretty capable lens. Right now we're at 28 millimeters. I'm doing a vlog just holding it under the camera. So this lens is a 2.8 lens when it's at 28 to about 31. And then the more you zoom in on this lens, the higher the aperture starts to get until it gets to 5.6. Now for photography, I think this is going to be a great lens because you're pretty much always changing your exposure as you're setting up your composition anyways. As far as video, it will darken on you when you push in the zoom because the aperture will change unless you have like an auto ISO or if you have the camera in something like shutter priority. So this lens is going to look pretty stable when you're pairing it with something like active stabilization, especially when it's in 28 millimeters. It is going to get a little shaky if you push it all the way out to 200 millimeters, unless you're riding on like a tripod or a gimbal or something like that. But this thing has some really awesome compression. We're just going to go around here and I'm just going to take lots of photographs. We're going to do some B-roll. I'm going to try to do some zoomed in shots in video to kind of see what it does. But really, I'm just really super curious to see if this is just the lens that I can bring with when I go traveling. One thing that I've noticed so far that's kind of tough with this lens is that when I'm zoomed all the way in, the wind is really strong here right now. We're getting like 30 to 40 mile an hour winds, so it's really hard to keep the camera steady when it's completely zoomed all the way out. Even on a tripod, I think it's going to be a little shaky when the wind hits. In fact, I'm not even sure if the audio is coming through on this because it is crazy windy right now. So one interesting side note is if you guys are actually going to make a trip to the Rockies and you're going to go over to Loveland Pass, it is a very terrifying road because there's no guardrails and you get very close to the edge. I have kind of a deal with heights, as you guys may know from some of my other videos. This road scared the crap out of me, so I'm going to film this while I can, while it's still sunlight out, and then we're going to get out of here. Okay, so far I'm actually enjoying this lens quite a bit. I think it's actually a really good lens to have if you're doing photography and you just want to bring one lens on a trip. So far I've been able to get pretty much everything I want to get as far as the focal length. I wish it was a 24 to like a 240, but I think the 28 is still plenty good for vlogging and the 200 is really good for pushing in on anything pretty much. And then if you're shooting with certain full frame cameras, you can use crop mode and get in even further and make it like a 300 millimeter. I'm using the A7S III right now, so I'm not going to be doing any clear image zoom crops, but this lens actually does do pretty darn well. So the one lens I have been using as my kind of go-to lens is the Sigma 24-70. It's definitely been a lens where it works pretty good for most situations, but then you come out here into kind of the Rocky Mountains or places like this, and that 200 millimeter is absolutely worth it. That 70, you push into 70 and it feels like you're not even zooming in much. So if you're trying to get more of a wide shot, yeah, the 24-70 is great, but having that extra 130 millimeters has made a huge difference so far, especially when things are just very far away from you. For instance, I just saw those trains I put on video. Those trains are quite a ways away from me, and normally even with the 24-70, I would have not been able to really get them at all, but because I had the 28-200, it's been actually pretty good at getting them in frame. So okay, so before we go to the next location, I just want to take a quick time out and thank today's sponsor of the video, and that's Cuts Clothing. If you guys are looking for some like premium t-shirts, sweatshirts, joggers, zip-ups, quarter zips, hats, Cuts Clothing has all of it now. They don't just make t-shirts anymore, they make pretty much anything you would want to wear. In fact, this whole trip underneath my jacket, I've been wearing Cuts Clothing. I've been wearing my black hoodie. This is the classic hoodie. I love this thing. It's awesome material. It's warm. The hoods feel great. They just fit really well, and they have some really cool side pockets, which you can't see. But then also, I've been wearing the new quarter zip, which is becoming one of my favorite shirts too. This thing's a very awesome material, lightweight, and it just looks good. Right now, it's like 10 degrees in Colorado, so it's a little too cold for this by itself, so I'm going to put the sweatshirt back on. All right, so if you want to check out any of these Cuts Clothing, go check out the link in my description. If you go through that link, it'll save you 15%. So you can go pick up like a hat, a shirt, a hoodie, a Sherpa, a zip-up, joggers, bomber jacket. They have a lot of stuff, so go check it out. Okay, so I came up to Buffalo Overlook in Genesee Park in Colorado, just kind of at the beginning of the mountains. And we're going to try to get some wildlife. There's usually a lot of buffalo roaming around. So far today, I haven't seen anything, so haven't been able to shoot any photos of them. But I'm going to drive around the park and see if I can find any. They're all kind of in a fenced-in area anyways, so. But also there's a cool spot over here with a bunch of trees, so I'm going to go take pictures of that. Alright, so it may look like I just walked back from Colorado, but I assure you I did not. Alright, so let's get right into this now. The Tamron 28-200. I'm going to go over the few things that I liked about this lens, and a few of the things that I feel like could probably be improved with this lens. Okay, so this is the Tamron 28-200. The first thing that I noticed with this lens when I bought it was how small and how light it actually is. For something that's like a 200 millimeter lens, you would expect this thing to be quite a bit bigger and quite a bit heavier. I would definitely say that this thing doesn't even come close to comparing to the weight and size of my Sigma 24-70. This thing does have a really nice rubber grip on it. It has a pretty decent manual focus ring. I think maybe it could be a little more substantial, but whatever. It does have a lock switch on it, so if you want to lock it in 28, it won't move anywhere until you unlock it. One nice thing about this lens too is that the lens doesn't sag, so if you shake it, the thing's not going to extend out on you and fall down like some of the Sigma lenses do. So yeah, just pretty much it's a lightweight, balanced lens that fits really good on the A7 IV, A7S III, A7 III, any of the like Sony full frame line. And then having the ability to have something as wide as a 28 and as zoomed in as a 200, I don't even know where to begin on saying how awesome that is. I've never had a lens that's gone from a 28 to something like a 200. You're always doing like a 28 to a 70 or a 70 to a 200. Never really had one that's done a 28 to a 200. So this thing has a phenomenal focal range. I really can't imagine what you couldn't use this for. So for photography, this thing is definitely going to be very capable. So the aperture on this lens does change from 2.8 all the way to 5.6. So when you're all the way wide, it's going to be a 2.8. And when you're all the way zoomed in, it's a 5.6. Don't let that 5.6 aperture fool you, because this thing puts out some serious blurred background or some bokeh. It's not going to be still like what a 2.8 is capable of, but at 5.6, when you're zoomed all the way in, this thing puts out some great images. So here's a shot where I was zoomed all the way to 200 millimeters. You can see I was focused on the plant life here, and it's got some pretty awesome blurred background. And it's still a very sharp image. And that's what I really liked about this lens, is it's still very sharp. This thing does have some chromatic aberration if you look really tough into like the tops of trees and things like that. But you can definitely fix some of the chromatic aberration in some of the Lightroom programs. But overall, this lens is still very sharp and very quality image. So we're not going to talk about this lens without talking about the things that I didn't like. First off, the aperture that changes. I'm really a big fan of fixed aperture, because I always like to lock all my settings in when I start filming. So I don't change my ISO or my exposure while I'm filming. So when you zoom in on this lens, it's going to get darker unless you start at like a 5.6 at the widest, which I don't usually want to do. So I'm not really a big fan of the fact that it changes the aperture as you zoom in, which makes this thing a little harder to use for video unless you're just going to set to a certain focal length and stay there. But if you do use like an auto ISO or a shutter priority, you can definitely just lock that exposure comp to where you want it set, and then you shouldn't worry about it. It'll just change automatically. So one of the things that's kind of a minor thing for me that I wasn't a big fan of on this lens, it is a plasticky kind of lens, so it's not the most durable, although I think you won't have any issues with this lens. It's got great weather sealing and stuff like that. But this plastic finish that's on here kind of can get scratched up pretty easily. I just had this thing kind of just sitting in my bag, and I don't even know what rubbed up against it, but it definitely kind of took that matte finish and made it a little bit shiny where it scratched. So wasn't a big fan of the fact that a lens like this can just sit in a bag next to something else and just easily get scratched. But I think this lens is a really durable lens, and I know that it's outstanding outside in all weather conditions. If you watch some other videos out there, people like Jake Sloan have used this thing out in Alaska all the time in all the elements, and these Tamron lenses take a beating, and they keep working. They're great. So if you guys are shooting on the aps-c line, like the A6400 or the A6600, or even like the ZV-E10, this lens is still going to be a pretty fun lens for you guys too. It'll actually be like a 42 to 300 millimeter lens. So you're going to get some like really extra good reach for this. I definitely wouldn't necessarily vlog with this lens if you're using an aps-c line, but this is going to be a pretty great lens for you guys as well. But also, it's a pretty inexpensive lens. I think it comes in at like $649, so it's a pretty reasonable priced lens that you will be able to use if you ever upgrade to a full frame camera. Okay, so my final thoughts on the Tamron 28-200 is, for photography, this thing is outstanding. It's going to give you pretty much every focal range that you're going to want or need. Now, as far as video is concerned, this is still going to be a very good lens as long as you know its limitations and the fact that you can't zoom in without changing your exposure, unless you have something set like auto ISO. But it is a very good lens for video. I think it looks really good. I didn't know if it was going to look quite as good as something like the Sony 70-200, but quite honestly, I'm very impressed with the quality of image that this lens has been able to put out. I think this thing is probably worth twice its price. And I think it's going to be a very good lens for if you just want to bring one lens to a vacation or a trip or just wherever you might be going, because it's going to be very versatile, being that 28 all the way wide to that 200. So I'm very happy with this purchase that I bought. And this is going to be one lens that I keep with me in my bag pretty much all the time when I go on vacation, because I think it's going to be very versatile and I won't have to bring like 6 different lenses. So if you have any questions on the Tamron 28-200 or just want to say hi, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. And if this video has been a help, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want to follow along to other videos. And as always, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Later.